Welcome to In Focus with Ijaz Haider. Tonight we begin with a discussion of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which entered into force on 22nd January 2021. Pakistan's official position, as stated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, reads, and I quote from that, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which was adopted in July 2017, was negotiated outside the established UN disarmament negotiating forums. None of the nuclear-armed states, including Pakistan, took part in the negotiations of the treaty, which failed to take on board the legitimate interests of all the stakeholders. Many non-nuclear armed states have also refrained from becoming parties to the treaty. Accordingly, Pakistan does not consider itself bound by any of the obligations enshrined in this treaty. Pakistan stresses that this treaty neither forms a part of nor contributes to the development of customary international law in any manner. Unquote. The issues on the table tonight are the genesis and purport of this treaty and its negotiating process. What was the need for this treaty in the presence of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty? Is it an attempt to resolve the problem of Article 6 of NPT, which requires that the parties to the treaty undertake to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date and to nuclear disarmament, and on a treaty on general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international controls, etc. For this, I'm joined by Dr. Naeem, a former brigadier of Pakistan Army and a former director Arms Control and Disarmament Affairs at the Strategic Plans Division. With him is Dr. Rifaat Hussain, head of Department of Public Policy at the National University of Science and Technology, and Ambassador Asif Durrani, a former Foreign Service officer. Thank you to the panel. Let's begin with Dr. Salik here. Dr. Salik, quickly, an overview of why the objection to this treaty being, negotiated outside the disarmament forum. So just walk us through this process before we get to the specifics.
Basically, the forum for negotiating multilateral treaties under the UN auspices is the Conference on Disarmament at Geneva. Even the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which was signed and open for signatures in 1996. The negotiations and the preparation of the draft of the treaty all happened in the Conference on Disarmament. It was only after India's veto to the passage of that treaty text there in CD, it was taken to General Assembly. So General Assembly is not the right forum for negotiating or finalizing any international treaty. So this is a departure that this was not only negotiated within the General Assembly, but also finally passed by the certain countries who are taking part in these negotiations at the General Assembly. So that is the first issue against the procedural methods of adopted to finalize this treaty.
Right. Okay. So let me get to Dr. Hussain here. Dr. Hussain, what exactly was the reason for the General Assembly to take this up outside the Conference of Disarmament, as Dr. Salik correctly pointed out? And what significance, if at all, does this hold?
Well, Ijaz, let me draw your attention to 1996 opinion of the International Court of Justice, in which they had declared the threat or the use of nuclear threats as illegitimate, but without taking a position whether the possession or the by nuclear have countries was an illegitimate question. So ever since that advisory opinion, there has been attempts by the civil society organization, in this case particularly the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, to delegitimize the very existence of nuclear weapons. So they this initiative takes off from the international advisory opinion, which was given by the International Court of Justice. So Brigadier Salik is absolutely right that even though this treaty has been negotiated or has been accepted as part of the UN General Assembly debate, but it lacks the force of implementation, which is only can only be binding on the all the nuclear weapon states. So none of the nuclear weapon states, which are right now 9, including the P5 plus India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea, they were part of these negotiations. So they stayed away from this initiative, not because they are not in favor of delegitimizing nuclear weapons, but on procedural grounds that this initiative was being negotiated on behalf of the coalition of a civil society organization. So that's one aspect. The other important aspect is that if how can we delegitimize nuclear weapons when countries in the world believe that they are more secure, they would feel more secure with nuclear weapons rather than without them. And the example of Iraq is with us, because there are a lot of people who are now suggesting if Iraq would have had the nuclear weapons or any weapons of mass destruction, which was widely debated when Iraq was invaded, so then the their country would not have been occupied, the Iraq would have survived as a country. So as long as there are challenges, existential challenges or threats to states who possess nuclear weapons, so they are not going to give up those nuclear weapons. And even, I would even go one step further and argue that even if one were to outlaw all the nuclear weapons in the world, so the nuclear infrastructure, the nuclear knowledge is going to be with us, and there is no guarantee that in case of a universal disarmament treaty, the world will not have some countries going for nukes, even in case of everybody were to give up nuclear weapons. So that's a huge question which leaves a huge gap in the negotiation of this treaty. So my sense is that this treaty does not suggest a way out of the conundrum which most of the countries face.
Correct.
That faced with these security threats, they are not going to give up their nuclear weapons, which are the ultimate guarantee of their security.
Right. The old dilemma of how do you disinvent an idea. But I'm very happy that you mentioned the 96 ICJ advisory opinion, because ICJ also took cognizance of Article 6 of the NPT. And that's the question that I want to take to Ambassador Durrani. Ambassador Durrani, the general sense from that was, and this is reflected mostly in writings that came out of the United States with reference to the ICJ decision, and it said the general thrust was that Article 6 is not a core provision of the treaty. And the core provision of the treaty deals with non-proliferation. Now, this is something about which there was a lot of criticism even when the treaty was indefinitely extended in 1995 conference. So give me a sense of, Dr. Hussain has talked about this dilemma. Give me a sense of the idea of the dangers associated with possession of nuclear weapons and the entire sort of legal, normative, and coercive, approaches that inform the implementation of NPT and other associated treaties.
When you talk about specifically about the NPT, so it is, in fact, when the review conferences took place, subsequent review conferences, the main demand by the member states who are party to the NPT was that you have to implement Article 6. and which all of, P5 especially, but specifically United States was deadly against it. That is why when CTBT was finalized in 1996, United States did not ratify till date. They have not ratified the CTBT, which will actually, which is the stepping stone for leading towards complete nuclear disarmament, because then countries would be bound not to go for test bans, not to go for having new tests. So there's a whole, you can say, regime which governs this whole politics of possessing nuclear weapons or not possessing nuclear weapons. Why they are after North Korea? Because North Korea was a signatory to NPT and it pulled out. Now, entering into the treaty was okay, but you cannot pull out of the treaty. But
well, even though the withdrawal clause, but obviously there is the coercive part of the nuclear regime, non-proliferation regime. But let me, before I go to Dr. Salik, remind the viewers that the 1995 conference began with considerable uncertainty, and in terms of the extension, and then there was a package deal, and that package deal rested on three basic pillars. One had to do with strengthening the review process. The other was the principles and objectives, and the third was indefinite extension. So indefinite extension depended on agreement on principles and objectives and strengthening the review process. And then there was a fourth pillar also, which was a resolution on the Middle East. But let's get to Dr. Salik here. Dr. Salik, Ambassador Durrani talked about the duplicity of the NPT. But we know that this is all about realpolitik, and so there's always some duplicity or the other. But ironically, now that we possess nuclear weapons, we also employ the same duplicitous argument as the other possessors of nuclear weapons. So give me a sense of where we stand in terms of disarmament. Well, now we know that we have a position with reference to our own security and with reference to others possessing nuclear weapons. But in the event that there was a serious move towards disarmament under Article 6, what would be our position?
But I think that is an idealistic scenario. It's not realistic. It's never going to happen. There can never be a complete disarmament. You keep reducing the weapons. Ultimately, people will come down to fist fight. So the violence cannot be taken away. And as Dr. Rifaat was also mentioning, the skills and knowledge once learned cannot be unlearned. And that is the famous statement which Margaret Thatcher also once made, that nuclear weapons are there to stay, because if you disarm today, the knowledge will stay there, the materials are there, and the moment there is a prolonged international conflict, people will go back to their laboratories and start producing nuclear weapons and try to beat each other in time and space. So that is the reality of the situation. So complete and general disarmament is an idealistic goal. I think we have not been even able to achieve effective arms control. Pakistan's position generally has been that it will participate in international processes towards arms control and disarmament as long as they are universally applicable and they are not non-discriminatory. But as has been pointed out, NPT is discriminatory in nature because it creates a divide between nuclear haves and nuclear have-nots. And similarly, the issue which Pakistan has had with the Fissile Material Cut-off Treaty is that there is a disparity in the stockpiles of fissile materials between different countries, and unless that is taken into account, any cut-off of future production will perpetuate that disparity. So that is Pakistan's position. And Pakistan has always maintained that we will be going along with the international consensus as long as it's universally applicable. Then I think we were talking about this dichotomy and hypocrisy in all this. Very interestingly, if you read the preamble of this nuclear prohibition treaty, one of the main arguments is the sympathy and about the fate of the victims of 1945 nuclear use in Japan, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the interesting aspect is that Japan is one of the countries which has decided to stay out of this. So the others are referring to the fate of the victims of nuclear use against Japan, and Japan itself is away from that treaty. So that's the irony of the whole situation.
Right. Now, I'll continue to use the arguments from the other side, because we have three deterrence optimists here. Well, actually four, including myself. But since we don't have a deterrence pessimist, so I'm going to put that hat on and conduct this. So one of the things, and this is for Dr. Hussain. So we talked about the fact that an idea cannot be disinvented. Dr. Salik also explained, also quoted Margaret Thatcher. But the issue is that these positions are taken by leaders and by states that already possess nuclear weapons. One example can be the Cambio treaties. The know-how is there, but the world managed to achieve a consensus in terms of complete ban on chemical and biological weapons. Why can't that happen with the nuclear weapons? And there's an added dimension to it, which is that given the emerging technologies and given cyber attacks and given the security that one requires, in view of those threats, it's becoming increasingly difficult to keep the weapons safe and secure.
Well, Ijaz, there are two related questions or two aspects to the question that you are posing. One, of course, is the deliberate use of nuclear weapons. And mercifully, the world has, beyond 1945, we have never seen an instance where we came pretty close during multiple nuclear crises, but the world was spared the deliberate use of nuclear weapons. And I cannot foresee any circumstances unless there is a full-fledged conventional conflict between the two countries. And then if those countries are nuclear armed, for example, or even they are under the protection of a nuclear protection of another country, I cannot see this happening. But the other is the inadvertent use of nuclear weapons, which means that one country makes grievous mistakes or judges the intention of its adversary and engages in behavior below the threshold. So there are dangers inherent due to faulty intelligence, due to the miscalculation, and the risk of inadvertent escalation can be higher. So because of these risks, which are associated with the inadvertent escalation, there is a great concern that the future conflict, particularly when they involve the conventional use of nuclear weapons, and then the countries who engage in this conflict are nuclear countries. So the fire break between conventional and nuclear use cannot be ensured. But these are dangers which can be minimized. There are large number of CBMs that can be negotiated, and even after the Biden administration, which has come into power about a month ago, they are in a hurry to start the strategic arms reduction talks with their main adversary, which is Russia. And then there is, of course, we have seen the Golden Valley crisis, in which the two nuclear-armed states, in this case China and India, they engage in a territorial skirmishes, and and there are tensions along the borders of the two countries. So our idea that nuclear weapons are necessarily bad in a situation of conflict, still I think it needs to be revisited.
Right. Before I wrap up, let me go to Ambassador Durrani here. Ambassador Durrani, as I said, I'm persisting with my deterrence pessimist line of argument. We saw what happened, post Balakot, and we have, on more than one occasion, we meaning the Pakistani government has been saying that there's a problem of spiral. Even the Prime Minister has talked about it. This is with reference to India's irresponsible and aggressive behavior. This is a nuclear dyad. So there are chances of some kind of escalation that could lead to miscalculation. For instance, the threat of missile attacks. There is no known way of finding out whether the incoming missile has a strategic warhead or a tactical warhead. And a country can either fail deadly or fail impotent. So give me a sense of how to address those issues. Now, there was at one time a proper framework in and through which India and Pakistan were talking about, among other things, nuclear risk reduction measures. But now, since there is no bilateral relationship worthy of talking about, where does one go from there?
Well, it's a grave situation. There's no doubt about it, because the new CBMs, which were initiated by India and Pakistan decades ago, are still, they are still, in vogue. For instance, the location of nuclear installations. The list is exchanged everywhere without fail on 1st of January. Similarly, we had other CBMs like pre-notification of ballistic missiles testing. So the two countries were moving towards those CBMs. But unfortunately, after the Bombay incident, everything is in a limbo. And there's a need for, in fact, reinitiating the dialogue, especially this dimension where the strategic weapons are involved. And we cannot take the liberty, the two countries. And then there's a need to make the people aware of the disasters, the destruction which these weapons have. Because I'm sure both in India and Pakistan, at the public level, people are not aware. That's why you sometimes listen rhetorics coming from our political leaders that what are these bombs are for. So I think it shows the lack of appreciation. And India has unfortunately started the new normal after this Balakot incident. And this is, again, a very dangerous situation. And that's why the world all over, whenever they talk about so-called nuclear disarmament, they say before the P5 can move, it's better that India and Pakistan, in fact, should be disarmed. So this is something we have to look at it, both India and Pakistan. It's just not Pakistan. Pakistan only reacted. And Pakistan cannot be blamed for what happened in South Asia as far as nuclearization is concerned. Yes.
Right. Quickly, Dr. Salik, Dr. Hussain talked about Joe Biden's approach for strategic, reduction talks, strategic weapons reduction talks. Now, last time, the Trump administration was approaching it in relation to also pulling in China, and of course, Beijing was not interested at all. Is this administration now focusing bilaterally with Russia, or they're also insisting on pulling in China?
I think they will go back to the traditional position of bilateral arrangements between Russia and United States, because the understanding was the Chinese and the other countries that the differential between size of their arsenal and the arsenals of US and Russia is too much, and unless they come somewhere close to their level, it will be unjust on their part to be involved in that kind of disarmament process. And interestingly, during the Trump administration, while they were trying to rope in China, they never talked of bringing in UK and France, who are in the same category as the Chinese. The arsenal sizes are all more or less similar. But they never talked of them. So that, I think, smacked of some kind of hypocrisy. There was not a sincere effort. It was, in fact, an effort to get out of that bilateral bind, even with the Russians. But right now, the good thing is that they have realized its importance, and they are going back to the new start.
Right. Any last thoughts, Dr. Hussain, but very quickly?
Well, very quickly, Ijaz, there is a great moral concern in the world about the dangers posed by weapons of mass destruction, including the nuclear weapons. And I cannot emphasize this enough, because we are living in a world which is moving towards many forms of conventional conflict. And in those conflict situations, if the nuclear weapons are present, so there is a great risk of nuclear war breaking out inadvertently and due to risk of miscalculation. And my primary example is that the situation, the way Iran is developing, because we have yesterday we had an announcement from the White House in which they are saying that Iran is well within 2 months of acquiring a nuclear weapons capability. So the question is that if GCPO doesn't work out and Iran is not brought back into the fold of the GCPOA agreement, so what is going to be the American response to Iran's potential breakout or acquiring nuclear weapons, or what is going to be Israel's response? So these are so the Middle Eastern question remains a very, very hot question, and I'm very concerned about this situation.
Right. It's interesting that you talk about JCPOA, because I did a segment on it yesterday, and the general consensus seemed to be that, given a number of factors, JCPOA is frankly in dead waters. But thank you so much, Dr. Salik, Dr. Hussain, Ambassador Durrani. We shall take a short break and return to discuss the harassment of journalists in India. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. Media representative bodies in India got together last Saturday and condemned the filing of sedition charges against 6 senior journalists and editors for their reporting on the farmers' tractor parade. They likened the situation to an undeclared emergency. Reports in the Indian media say a number of media bodies, including the Press Club of India, Editors Guild of India, Indian Women's Press Corps, Delhi Union of Journalists and Indian Journalists Union joined the protest. Senior journalist and president of the Press Club of India, Anand Sahe, was quoted as saying, and this is a direct quote from the report, "Today the atmosphere is such, it's so poisonous, so toxic, that anyone who wants to go to the court perhaps is a fool. You know what the result is going to be." Even during the emergency, and he's obviously referring to Mrs. Gandhi's emergency, rules against journalists were not so harsh. I don't recall anybody going in for sedition, unquote. Those are very strong words. But it seems that objective journalists in India increasingly feel the heat of policies adopted by the BJP government led by Mr. Narendra Modi. To discuss this further, I'm joined by Gowhar Geelani, an eminent Kashmiri journalist and author of Kashmir, Rage and Reason, and Mr. Ravi Srivastav, who's a political affairs commentator. Let me begin with Mr. Srivastav here. Mr. Srivastav, what in Darwin's name is happening in India?
situation in India is really precarious at this moment. And as you have mentioned, there are instances where the government is just clamping down on anything and everything which is a freedom of speech. Whether it is a media channel, whether it is a newspaper, whether it is a journalist covering any event, any such thing, they are trying to just gag the voice. And what Sahai has rightly mentioned, that going to the courts would be just fruitless and will not result any change in it. We have seen already the cases were filed against Rajdeep Sardesai, Mrinal Pandey, and several senior journalists in Delhi for reporting on the farmers' protest.
But Mr. Srivastav, I understand that. You and I have discussed on this program a number of times the kind of, authoritarian, almost totalitarian approach taken by this BJP government. But sedition, I mean, how can you put sedition charges on a journalist for reporting an event?
You have rightly chuckled at us. Actually, this is the problem. This is the problem. They want to stop the voice of opposition under the charge of sedition. Anything you speak against the Prime Minister, anything you speak against the ruling dispensation, it is branded as sedition only. And the fact is, in last 4 years, at least more than 300 cases of sedition have been filed, and not even 2 have reached to any conclusion because the cases were false. Now, the fact is, it is not confined only to the media reporting, TV channels. They are trying to gag even the social media platforms like Facebook, like Twitter, Insta. Everywhere you will find that, yesterday only some 250 handles of Twitter were blocked, and they were blocked for more than 12 hours for no reason. The explanation Twitter gave that some legal requirement, they are going to stop those channels, those particular handles. So this is what is the stage. I tell you, there are people suffering, rotting in the jails for months together for no charge. Kafil Khan, Dr. Kafil Khan, who had saved several lives in Gorakhpur, was rotting in 9 months in the jail, and finally High Court said there is no case. The government had wrongly interpreted the particular statement by him. So this is the situation. One very senior activist, Mr. Stan Smith, 83 years old, he is just rotting in a jail for last 2 years. Sudha Bharadwaj, Varvara Rao, some people, they have been branded that they are the Maoists, they are the anti-nationals, they are the pro some enemy country, and such charges are put on them. They are put on the UAPA, one act by NIA, and they are just sent to jail because the judicial system is not prompt. They are not going to take up those cases so fast. So you have to remain in the jail for at least months together before your case even comes up for hearing for bail. So that's the situation, and the government has become totally intolerant. Especially the second round of Shri Narendra Modi, the government has become totally intolerant, and they are not ready to listen any criticism. I would not call criticism, any opposition voice to their decisions. If anybody supports the farmers' protest, he will be branded anti-national. Somebody opposes the Yogi Adityanath government's any decision in Uttar Pradesh, he will be branded anti-national. So such is the situation as well, that people are really, scared. They're not able to open their mouth. They're not able to speak a word. And especially it is happening to journalists, artists, activists, and social media influencers, top people. You must have heard a name of Kunal Kamra. He's a comedian. There is one Munawar Faruqi who spoke something against the government, and he has been jailed. For Kunal Kamra, this case is going on in Supreme Court. He's a comedian. He makes a satire. He speaks certain, on a stage shows and programs, and he has been jailed. I mean, he's being charged for that. This is the situation.
Right. Stay with me, Mr. Srivastava. Let me pull in Gowhar Geelani here. Mr. Geelani, clearly this is not something that you're not familiar with. What India has started, mainland India has started seeing now, is something that Kashmir has seen for many, many years. So give me a sense of how you look at what's happening.
I, broadly agree with what my previous speaker, Mr. Srivastav, had to say. To say that the situation in India right now is unprecedented would be an understatement. As you rightly pointed out, that this is the same blueprint that has been used in Kashmir and abused in Kashmir for many, many years. And today, people say that there are two Indias. Like one India is where the likes of Ornab Goswami or the likes of Sudhir Chaudhary or those rabid right-wing influencers who support the ruling dispensation are giving, have a field day. They have a free run. They can say anything. They can, get away with anything. You saw how the Supreme Court barged in when there was a case against Mr. Goswami, and how, there are serious charges against his kind of reportage and his kind of connections with the ruling dispensation, and how secrets were revealed, official secrets, but he won't be touched. So then there is another India where anyone who has a voice, anyone who wants to dissent and who wants to criticize and who wants to speak truth to the power, as Mr. Srivastava said, there is no tolerance, there is zero tolerance for that kind of India. And second thing is, which is important, that journalists in India, when this was being done to journalists in Kashmir repeatedly for many, many years, hardly any journalist in India spoke in favor of journalists in Kashmir. There was a limited solidarity. They actually kind of, tolerated oppression against journalists in Kashmir in the larger, quote unquote, national interest or for the sovereignty and security of country, as they say. So that, but we kept repeating that this is not today. It is us. Tomorrow it will be you. And we kept reminding them about that famous German poem that when they came for me, there will be no one to speak up. But they didn't care because they thought Kashmir is a laboratory. This won't come to us. Right now, you see the situation at the Delhi borders. There are fortifications, barricades. Even farmers are being stopped from protesting or assembling. And this is like you will see a war-like situation emerging on the borders of Delhi, Haryana, and people coming from Punjab, farmers coming from Punjab trying to come to Delhi for the February 6th protest. So this is the situation. And third thing, which is very important, is that the manner in which we see the situation escalating right now. But there was always, we had cases of Prasan Vajpayee, who lost his job, who was anchoring the show Masterstroke, which had a very good audience. And he actually, in his show, revealed how fake news was peddled by no less than the Prime Minister of India with his one program where the team of Prasan Vajpayee went to that woman who then said that she was tricked into saying on video link when she was with Mr. Modi. And then he lost his job. There was Abhisar Sharma who lost his job. And there are very countless journalists who one of them was heading Hindustan Times as editor, Bobby Ghosh. So all of these senior names who had a say in Indian media, they lost their jobs one by one. And now the situation is it's another escalation where cases are registered, where summons are being, and then the entire process of judicial process is punishment in itself. We had a case yesterday. One of my colleagues, Fahad Shah, who heads the Kashmir Wala news website, there are multiple cases registered against him, and there are multiple cases against 40 journalists in Kashmir. And the thing was that he reported something on 26th January, and now there is a case against him. And you see, like the moment you report, the moment you write, there is always this sword hanging on your head that something is going to happen, whether this word, whether this sentence, whether this para, irrespective of it being a fact, it means that you have to go to jail. Such is the atmosphere of fear.
Right. Mr. Srivastav, two questions. Quickly, I'm running out of time also. One, the journalists are made to lose their jobs. Is that because the government pressurizes the owners? Is that does that have anything to do with the fact that they won't get the government ads or what? And secondly, my question is that if the farmers or any other protesters, there were the CA protesters and all, if they are there, what is the media supposed to do? Blackout, not report it?
As a second question first, it is media's prime responsibility to bring out the truth. The truth can be in any form, whether it's a video, whether it's an audio, whether it's still picture, or whether it is a reportage. They have to bring out the fact, and if they try to do it, the problem is there is on border. There was a joke floating in the morning on social media. The kind of fortification Delhi police has done on Singhu border, Tikri border, and Ghazipur border, had they done so with the China, probably a few hundred of square kilometer land they would have recovered back. It's a fortification altogether. There's 7 layers of the police force is there. The layers of the barricades are there, as if some enemy is going to attack India altogether. This is what they are doing to their own farmers. And exactly, you rightly said, the CAA protest just a year before, the similar way, the police fortification and removing them from the scene. As far as the media is concerned, I have said earlier also on your channel that 90% of the media is totally pro-government media. For their own reasons, a channel is not a gurudwara. It's run on cash. It has to mobilize cash. It has to get the ads. It has to get the revenue from outside. Otherwise, they'll not be able to survive. So they hardly can afford to defy the line what government is doing. And if some channels are doing so, they are being penalized for that. There is one NDTV and some couple of more channels who try to speak truth. They are being penalized by the cases against their founders, some income tax rates, some ED rates, some old cases are dug out. All such kind of torture is done to those people. And those, Geelani rightly said, some anchors who have been hand in gloves with the government, who are giving the first-hand information like Pulwama and Balakot before even the government took the action. So they had a privy to that particular information and they were running it on their channels. So it's not an official Secrets Act, and then nobody is penalizing him. It's just a case is going on in the court. So how they get the information prior to the government takes action? They try to utilize it, they try to encash it, and that's how they try to survive. Yeah.
Right. Quickly, before I wrap up, Mr. Geelani, Mr. Sahe also said that going to the court is of no use. Now, that's a very strong indictment of what's happening to the justice system in India. Give me your quick thoughts on that before I close the program.
I mean, there are no second opinions, two opinions about what that gentleman has said, because that has been the precedence set. Whenever there's a case against this case against Munawar Farooqi, a comedian who didn't even crack a joke. BBC did a story. Mr. Shotik Biswas did a story on him that a joke is in prison. Even if you can't crack a joke, you can't even think that you will crack a joke. And he was penalized by the judge that he was going to crack a joke. That's why he's in jail. So I absolutely agree with what that gentleman has said. It's judiciary is also under control and it's also under a lot of stress. All the institutions in India are right now totally controlled by the ruling dispensation, and that's it's a very dangerous scenario.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Ravi, Srivastav. Thank you, Mr. Gowhar Geelani. This is all from In Focus tonight. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.